Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Azania in Therapy. I'm your host, Tlaka. My guest today is a clinical psychologist in Athlone, Cape Town. He is an executive council member of SISA. He has had the honor of chairing the Psychology Professionals in Public Service Division of SISA. His research interests include critical psychology, public health, a very interesting man. Please welcome Daniel Dan Hollander. How are you, my good sir?
Thank you for such a warm welcome. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me.
Yes, finally we get to meet. I've been checking you out. I spoke to you before, and then you're doing interesting things. Maybe let's get into what are you currently passionate about working on?
So I think there's often a bit of a gap between what we are taught and what we do.
Yes.
I think that sometimes it can be understood because our democracy, although it's over 20 years old now, but it's still relatively young in the world of science, in the world of psychology. And I think, especially when I finished and was qualified in 2010, the training that I received, I think we realized at the time that there was things that we were taught that wouldn't be applicable, but I don't think we fully understood it until we were right into the field. So I'm quite interested in the idea of developing a psychology for South Africa by South Africans, that kind of understanding. And that's where I spend my energy on and use different forums in order to get that through. I think in my practical work, I'm constantly sitting there with a critical eye, critical to the extent of dealing with pathologies in the clients that are in front of me, but also critical on what I'm busy doing. And, I come from a school of psychology in UKZN, in what I want to call the glory years of UKZN psychology, when they had a psychology in society, the pins set up. The only way to have access to them is through their journal. But in those days, we were taught critical social psychology, and in such an important and interesting way in regards to redefining and re-understanding how we understand psychology within the South African context, deconstruction all the way. We were the pleasant bunch that had to learn Foucault and Derrida, and learn how to constantly be critical and deconstruct what we're busy doing. And I think that kind of, from a practical point of view, because I've really just focused on psychology in practice, not in academia, although I flirt with it constantly, that from a practical point of view, these things need to come through. Otherwise, it just becomes articles and journals, and that doesn't always bring in change.
No, wonderful, and that's partly why I wanted to talk to you, because when I first heard you, and even when we engage, I get the sense that there's this awareness regarding what we are taught and how we practice. There's an awareness regarding the need for psychology, that we have to meet the needs of society, and then one also has questions about where we train properly. Maybe before we get into that, what are your views of the current perception of psychology in South Africa? Maybe in the continent, but mostly in South Africa. How do professionals view it? How do citizens view it? What's your sense?
Sure, there's a loaded question. I'm going to try and give it justice. I think first of all is, as a person who's been in the fields, I think my first sort of reaction, especially from a social perspective, is confusion. Why I say confusion is, imagine that you are sitting in a situation where you have to become the leadership for a nation that is highly traumatized and that has suffered one of the worst forms of abuse towards people, because it's not the abuse on the physical, although that was there, but it was a abuse of trying to destabilize people on the basis of their family relations, of their connection, the connection to society, their spiritual. I mean, there's a very famous quote of Steve Biko where he says, "Material want is bad enough, but coupled with spiritual poverty, it kills." Um, you would have imagined that right at the beginning of our democracy, one of the first things that we would be focusing on is finding ways in which to resolve the trauma and to work with the trauma, the collective trauma. And I'm not saying that hasn't been done. There's some incredibly important work being done in regards to trauma work within the South African context. But we find that on the governmental level and on the political level, it's almost as if it's been ignored. Mental health is not on the primary levels. It's not on the focus of healthcare. I mean, if you compare it with other fields like TB and HIV, it's very much down. And yet, I can almost imagine hearing a person say, "Yeah, but you can't compare mental health to TB and HIV." And yet, in a very weird way, we are sitting with epidemics that are very much psychological, gender-based violence, prejudice on incredible scales, xenophobia, and these are all things that are an actual facts. If you read the great work of Frantz Fanon, and that was written in the 40s, 50s, please don't quote me, he actually even predicted that a country that would come out of a decolonial past, if not careful and building practices that maintain the humanity of people, will fall into that trap, and those will be the things of it. And I mean, when something is said so long ago and it comes true, it's eerie in its scariness, but there's maybe some understanding towards that. So mental health and traumatization hasn't happened. Look, this is really my own humble personal opinion, but I think the reason why that happened was because when you go through trauma, especially when you're a leader going through trauma always silences. And so people don't want to talk about these things because it immediately places them in a narrative that disempowers them. And I think to some extent, we can quite happily say with the mental health gap, as bad as it is, and it's never really resolved, even with the great work of Lund and Peterson in Lund in Cape Town and Peterson in KZN. They're doing incredible work in order to try and address and bring real change into it. It gets as ridiculous as the fact that the only time it seems that anybody's taking mental health seriously is when we have a disaster like, they call it the Life Esidimeni disaster, but it actually should be called the Gauteng Department of Health disaster, because Life Esidimeni was not listened to. And then only do we start to listen to changes, and Gauteng is starting to change that around. But there's something there that's not okay. The other thing is that psychology has a really interesting position. We don't quite fit in the one place and we don't quite fit in the other place. Reminds me of humans. Humans don't fit in the one place and not quite in the other place. We have this amazing ability of adapting. And I think psychology is exciting in regards to that. I know a lot of people want to control it. Is it biology? Is it medicine? But the thing is that I think its power is in its ability to be adaptable. And so it never works if you sort of somehow just see psychology as being a medical profession. It sits sort of in between, quite beautifully, between biology and philosophy, which should never be able to be combined, and yet psychology does it. And in a similar way, sits sort of in between social justice, bringing in ideas of humanity, but at the same time also is quite comfortable within a hospital setup. So it's in between things. And I think that for a lot of people, that's very confusing, because especially people who want to try and regulate psychology, probably as difficult as it is to regulate humans. I think that kind of that analogy can continue. And so I think also, I've heard once, I used to work in a psychology department, and our head of department was once told, you're heading a psychology department that's like herding cats. and I think he's right.
Yeah,
And then on sort of lastly is I think that, see, there was in Britain once upon a time there was a psychologist who wanted to disprove psychotherapy as being completely pseudoscience. His name was Asen.
yeah,
And he went quite far and got quite close in regards to making psychotherapy, or proving psychotherapy to be a pseudoscience.
Hmm.
Problem was, and this is the interesting thing about psychology, is that
yeah,
psychologists ourselves, I'm a bit worried about, because we often sit back where we should be going forward. Maybe it's part
yeah.
of the job because, we sit back, we listen, we never self-indulge in regards to our information or try and keep it very limited. And I think that plays out itself into society as well. We're often not in the forefront. I remember once Prof. Stevens saying, psychologists won't be at the revolution. And I don't think he's wrong. But the thing is, at the same time,
Yeah.
psychology survives because it's relevant. It just seems to work. And it survives on that basis. It just seems to work. And in that case, I don't worry about psychology. I think psychology will stay with us forever, in some form and in some place. But I think that the problem is we have to rechange the way we think about things and we do things, and start to think much more critically, because psychology can do two things. It can either liberate us, or, and I think that that's very true, has proven in the past to be the bridesmaid for colonialism. It's a mechanism that can control. And no better example of that within the South African context, where we understand that for Verwoerd's apartheid structure is very much based on the fact that Verwoerd was a psychologist. And we must never forget that. We have the power to do real damage.
Beautiful, actually, wonderful insights. I wanted to actually start where you left off with, when we asked the question, how is psychology seen, whether we are relevant or not. Verwoerd was a psychologist and came up with this, structure that still has a powerful effect on society. And so I like that you brought that up, that we must not underestimate that aspect of it, because it still affects us today. The other part I find interesting about your response is the trauma aspect, where, when there's a, it's like we're going through a season of reporting on GBV and violence, and we sort of lack the vocabulary to kind of make sense of what's going on. And part of that is that I suppose those who could say something maybe don't say something. So the idea that we are taught to sit back, listen. Psychologists could, I think, have a bit more of a voice, participate a bit more, and so to also make sense, how people understand, how does trauma, the disruption of relationship, the inability for people to work through their emotions, and how that manifests in relationships, whether in the home or in the corporate sector. So we miss the trauma aspect, and I mean that psychology we have to understand that. The other interesting point that I like is how you describe this, where psychology fits in. It doesn't exactly fit in. Is it a medical model? Is it a social thing? And it's both. and it's both in that I think partly, I don't know if it's your observation as well, there's a whole business aspect to it, where we are forced to position ourselves a certain way, right? For example, with medical aids, if I'm a clinical psychologist, I have to be in this clinical setting, and then I work with these particular disorders that I can change. I don't know in state, but there's a push for that. But I wonder if also that limits us from engaging with society. I interviewed somebody before for this particular show, and then he said to me, this guy was he got involved in crime, and he had been arrested, right? So we were talking about modeling, the lack of models, and then he says, how come, you, like, people like you don't, you're not out there, like, we don't see people like you. Like, if we watch TV or we're on social media, we see, like, artists and musicians and the arts, and these people are living nice lives, and that's what we aspire to. But we don't see you, we don't see people like yourselves, to show that life can be done in a different way. So I like the points that you bring up, the trauma, the where Fervoot comes in, where we fit in then as people. Yeah. So with regards to, what we are taught, right, in the master's programs, how the what we are taught, do you think it translates well into what we do? So we receive theory and some training during the master's program, and then we go into the world, and we are in practices, we are in the hospitals. Do you feel what we receive theoretically and a bit of practice, does it translate well with what we see, the issues that people come up with? What's your sense?
And then there's another part of me that says, but what did you expect? Let's look at it realistically. I mean, I've completed the training part of my in the internship in 2009. So I finished in 2008, finished ComSoap in 2010. 2008 minus what, 94 was when we were liberated. So we're talking about 14 years.
Yeah.
What was I expecting the master's program to be able to entail? And I think here's one of the things that is the reason why psychology sometimes feels a bit back, is if there's an issue and I'm sitting back realizing there's a problem but not doing anything about it, we're the trained generation to change those scripts and to change those works. And there's been people who've done that. I mean, there's been incredible work that's come through from Shahida Janssen, Kopano Rutele, Kezi Bunzai. The book on decolonization is just brilliant. Starting to change through the minds. There's so much more to even. I mean, there's libraries of this work. Santosh Pillay does incredible work around this line as well. V. Ronald Carolison does groundbreaking work in regards to changing these types of perceptions and changing the way in which we engage. And so I think to an extent is, if you're a psychologist coming in and you're worried about your training, that's because you've got to do an Einstein thing of rechanging the syllabus the moment that you graduate. That's our responsibility at this point in time. And I think to an extent is that shifts the way that you think, because now it's not about, did my master's plan adequately train me? It's being part of a very exciting generation. Remember, if you're born free, and born frees are now finally coming into practice, if you make the calculations. If you're born free, you have something that the older generation doesn't have, which is that you have a liberated mind that's without the understanding of the trauma that took place beforehand. And especially when you're working with texts like Claudel van Eck, we all were traumatized by that. Not traumatized in the sense of we were all hurt by it, but traumatized in the sense of that there are chains in the minds that have made our ability to connect with each other and connect with ourselves heavily damaged. And those chains need to be carefully removed, like a delicate brain operation. And in its place, a space of healing needs to take place. And then out of a healed mind comes the gold, comes the way in which we can start to ask the questions and find solutions that brings us into the new dawn as stronger, more connected, more spiritually aware human beings.
Yeah, I like the way you reframe it, right? In the sense that, some people can feel hard done by with regards to what they received in that training, but what you're sort of pointing to is the idea that, hey, hang on, I mean, You got some tools, but we are I suppose, at the beginning of something great, in that we learn, and then we are able to change, and it's there's a new generation that is supposed to lean into that direction, to take to take that up a bit more. And you talked about the glory days of UKZN, but the other work, there's another institution here in Pretoria, previously called Medunsa,
Yes.
Sefako Mahato. I think they're also doing some interesting work. So when I meet people from UKZN and I meet people from Sefako Mahato, I can sense that there's a deliberate attempt to shape and to create and to rewrite. And so for me, that's very exciting for me, in that people are we are thinking about doing something different. Now, you mentioned people doing wonderful work, like Prof. Radele. And when you said that, I wanted to ask you, why do you think that, when I drive by the highway here, I'll see law firms, right? I'll see a law firm, like this huge law firm. I'll see an accounting firm. And
Yeah.
then I often wonder about psychologists. I say, we've got these pioneers, people doing interesting work. How come do we not seem to, in a sense, speak with one voice? Like, there isn't like a, if I say, psychology, it's not like one big group of people that you can imagine. I know that person. Why do you think that is?
Let me just see. I understand why psychology doesn't seem to have one singular voice.
Yeah, why it seems to me that we struggle to collaborate and work on, say, one particular project that might stand
Yeah.
out. It's like you get great people doing great work, but in silos.
Yeah, that's a very important question. That's a very
Yeah.
important question. I think that there's a very simple answer, because there's no directorate of psychology. And psychology has a very weird relationship when it comes to other professions. So let me explain to you. For example, in the faculty of medicine, you'll find psychology. In the faculty of education, you'll find psychology. In the faculty of law, you find psychology. I mean, like a psychologist who works, or even a branch of psychology that's being trained within those different faculties. Why? And are these faculties talking to each other? Sorry, my dog might be barking a bit in the background. The other thing is, and for some weird reason, we always seem to be wanting to be in other faculties, whereas we often not centralized to each other, and we don't talk to each other. That's very obvious that we don't talk to each other. The other thing is that I think often part of the job is that especially if you do individual psychotherapy, that you in the space, people come to you, people leave you, come back, leave. Most of us are overworked, so we spend an extreme amount of time in that kind of relationship. So psychology or psychologists can be very lonely in their professions, and I think sometimes that creates a bit of a silo effect. So we're all operating in our own silos. I know that it is sometimes quite tricky to do research and practical work, and what are the benefits of doing so. So we start to germinate ideas really in our consulting room, but it's a closed silo environment where ideas don't come out. So we don't really always have opportunities to talk about it. But I think also, on the other hand, is to say that maybe it's also a bit of a remnant of our previous apartheid system, where for example, I've raised this with CISA quite a few times, is that we like to use the word divisions. The problem with the word division is it's got the word divide in it.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite yeah.
Yeah. And I think to an extent is to say, that this is often where the problem comes in is that I don't think it's natural for people to divide, as much as some of my evolutionary psych friends would counter me on that. I think that diversity is always better. We know that the more diversity within our genetics makes for healthier human beings,
Yeah.
in the same way, we know that diversity of thoughts, great minds think alike is BS. Great minds don't think alike. That's kind of the point. So you find people who counter you or who are smarter than you. It's an intimidating space to be in, but it's a necessary space to be in. And I think it's around those types. And also, one of the most dangerous ideas we've ever had in the history of humankind is that our resources are limited. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know why it's there. We're living in a time of abundance. I know that's hard to say with things like going through a recession and so forth. But if you think about it logically, we are smart now enough to be able to, if we are enabled to by the people that control us, we could live in a time of abundance. Poverty, money, property, these are man-made things, man. These are man-made concepts. I know this is going to sound a bit revolutionary, but these are man-made concepts. I'm talking from the work of Rick Turner, who was shot dead for these ideas in the 70s, and a great friend of, and worked together, collaborated a lot with Steve Biko, is the idea that we are governed and controlled by things that actually do not exist except in a hypothetical sense. And that sometimes what happens is that we are controlled by these things because it's more comfortable to be controlled, because then I don't have to think and I don't have to destabilize myself and settle myself. And there's an element of that in that discussion too, is that, why change the structures has been working for so long. Daniel, don't come here and I'll come up with your anarchy ways, But I think to an extent that's why. And I agree with you. One of the first things that we should do in psychology, and I've been a big proponent of this, is we must have a directorate of psychology. If that's university-based, if that's nationally based, it doesn't matter. But we need to have a directorate of psychology. We need to have one unified place in order to deal with psychology. It doesn't mean that we govern by a directorate, but it means that there needs to be, obviously needs to be adaptability and conversation and dialogue. But there needs to be a unification. Otherwise, we end up in the weird spaces we do. Just one thing. Our scope of practice documents. Very famous scope of practice documents. And there was a big fight around ago, and let's not bring up the fight, but about scope. I think we're the only profession, if I'm not mistaken, whose scope of profession documents is dependent on another profession in order for it to be validated. So the difference between clinical psych and counseling psych is the fact that we can deal with psychopathologies. Now that's not totally correctly interpreted, I know that. But there's a big play on psychopathology in regards to what's regarded as severe conditions. Now, who determines that within the academic space within South Africa? It's the DSM. As much as we want to pretend it's the APA and we use the ICD-10 codes and so forth, the WHO, and we use the ICD-10 codes and so forth, we know that I wasn't taught ICD-10, I was taught DSM. Now, where does DSM come from? DSM is the flagship manual for the American Psychiatric Association. So psychology doesn't have, I mean, there's been great work in regards with the WHO, including psychology, but psychology doesn't have a space, or a big space in the psychiatric world. And so what happens is that the American Psychiatric Association has a direct influence on what conditions can be used by clinic or should be referred to clinical and to non-clinical, which is our scope of profession document, which is our identity. So our identity is determined by somebody else. And if we don't understand these things and we don't think about these things properly, that's where we end up in very weird conversations and very weird fights that should really not be relevant and not be in existence. And I think that's the problem, is we're taught as psychologists to be critical, but we're not. And that creates sites of complexity.
Yeah, those are interesting points there. I like the idea that we should have some sort of directorate, because for me, when I think about anything succeeding, I think a group of people who at least agree on some important things are able to pull together. And I find
Yeah.
that we struggle to do this. Like we struggle with leadership, or we've got old ways of functioning. But I think going forward, we need more conversations with each other, like-minded people who build together. I think then we can make more a dent, more we can be more impactful. I think if we are able to collaborate and at least on what we agree on some important issues. But I think working together will definitely make a difference, right? Um,
Of course.
then what I wanted to ask you then, maybe related to this, right? I said, UKZN and Sfako Makhato, they're doing that kind of work, right? Where did you study, by the way?
You guys are in. Oh, when?
Yeah. Oh, you did say where UKZN. So when I was applying for masters, I got accepted at it was Meduns at the time, Sfako Makhato, and NUP,
Lovely
right?
university. Lovely university.
Yeah, NUP, right? And well, I
It's a
ended
good
up
university.
I ended up going to UP. But I remember after they got the group, we were about 10 or 12. And at the time there was Shaw Foster, who I would have went there for. Um, yes, so the group gets selected, and then he says to everybody in the group, he says, by the way, next year everybody is supposed to learn an African language.
Lovely.
I was looking all at everybody in the room, and then but in a way, that made me think about where we are going in terms of language. If language doesn't also make it difficult for us to work together, where we are divided by language, and that also has effects on the kind of people that we see. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Language and its ability to either unite or divide us.
I'm assuming, yeah, look, knowing that the possible demographic of your classroom at UP, it was UP, right, where this challenge was given.
Well, no, this was Sefako Makato at the time.
Okay.
UP, they didn't say anything like that.
And I'm assuming that there were quite a few people who needed to learn a new language in the space of a month. I think that suddenly that classroom understood privilege.
Yeah, because the problem was you guys are going to work in a community, so it does help that you learn the language of people you are going to work with. And for myself as well, I mean, I had to go to Ekurhuleni, so I'm Pedi speaking, and we take it for granted, right? So African male, black African male going to Ekurhuleni, of course it should be easy, but there's Zulu speaking there, and then here comes a gogo speaking Zulu, and you now all these ideas about maintaining the frame, and Jung and Freud, and now you have to deal with this gogo who's speaking Zulu, who knows nothing about Pedi, and so including myself. Then I mean, that made me think. Well, of course I learned. I had to learn. So I think things like that we take for granted. The fact that language, I suppose we don't learn each other's languages. Sometimes I think it also makes it difficult for us to work together. And granted, maybe it's the idea you mentioned earlier, that being comfortable is sometimes makes it difficult. We are used to what works. We think it will always work, and therefore we are not willing to be uncomfortable. It's something that you also say that the future belongs to those who struggle. And speaking of struggles,
can struggle.
Who can handle who
can struggle. The future doesn't belong to those who struggle. The future belongs to those who can struggle. That can is very important.
Yeah, and maybe you can, as you explained that, I wanted to link that to the idea of, say, our training, right, with regards to media, um, social media. Do you think they should be in a master's program or part of our training? Okay, this is how you do an interview. Um, this is, what do you think about that? You can go. This is how you deal with Twitter and Instagram. Because what we were told is like social media, bad, 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 bad. Don't go.
Listen, you've just given me a whole meal, and you're talking about the dessert. So if it's okay, I just want
Yeah,
to
go
go
back to
through
the
the meal,
meal.
because I think there's some really important questions that you're raising there, and I'm going to assume that they're not rhetorical. I think there's three questions in that. I'm going to keep me accountable that I deal with the last, but it really is like that. That's the dessert part. Social media is the dessert part, because if the other two parts are there, then the meal will be nice. So I think first of
Great.
all, it's the language story. And I think to my own extent, I've been quite fortunate, but I don't know if that was a good thing. Is that I've only ever had to work exclusively with the translator once, because I also came to the realization that unless I understand the language intimately well, um, I'm always going to give a half-assed product if I speak isiZulu inside. So the only time that I ever used the translator was when I was working in Prince Msheni. I think the only time I've ever worked with the population who couldn't speak English. And I had an amazing translator by the name of Sachaba, and I think he was a third-year psych student who came in and worked as a translator, great exposure, of course. And we built such a brilliant relationship. Very clever from their notion as well, so that you stuck with your translator. So he was your translator, so that the two of you could really start to work with each
Yeah.
other and develop it accordingly. Um, and what was quite cool was by the end of working with him and listening out for words and so forth, actually for a brief period of time in my life could talk an intermediate level of isiZulu, but then I moved to the Northern Cape where it was Setswana and my Zulu. um, so I do know that language works. Learning a language is actually a bit of BS. I know that, for example, doing a psycholinguistics class, that it was constantly said to us that learning a language, you learn a language through practice, not through learning a language. You have to be practicing it constantly, and I'm a big believer of that.
Yeah.
The thing is, when you see, the problem is it's not enough. That's the point I'm trying to make. Learning a language does not make you understand somebody. Okay,
Yeah.
it makes you understandable, but not understanding. So, and I came across that quite quickly as well. Like one of the things that, and I don't know who taught me this, but it sort of was there, was be curious, be constantly curious.
Yeah.
Curiosity gives you a lot of grace, a lot of space, a lot of forgiveness, and a lot of new ventures in order to go to, because obviously I'm a particular skin color, and I'm the one thing that does work for me in regards to working with disempowered communities is that I can identify on the level of being a foreign national and not made to, especially in school, got bullied quite a bit about being a foreign national. So but then again, I'm a foreign national from a colonizing power, so it's a bit of a weird space to be in. But I kind of, to some extent, know what it feels like not to fit in from the structure that was there. That helped a bit in regards to it, but in a very minuscule way, not even close, and that made me curious. But the other part of my history that was quite interesting was that my family came into South Africa in 1991, which was when, sort of a few months after Mandela was released. That was actually the condition in which my parents decided to move to South Africa, was to come into the liberated South Africa. My father came in with at the time there was an international call for healthcare professionals. He's a surgeon, to come into South Africa and help the new republic that was at foot. So that's sort of my coming into South Africa. So I never saw the apartheid South Africa. It was already in being disintegrated at the time that we arrived. although I know that the election was in '94. And so that left me very curious, because it's a very strange story, apartheid, and the way in which we live there. My brain doesn't, still to this day, it doesn't commute. I don't understand what that was like. I see videos, and it's like, it's for me like watching a dystopia movie, as it must be for a lot of born friends as well. But what was interesting when I was living there was that everybody around me was like still reeling with the effects of it. So I had just a lot of people talking to me about what it was about, and navigating their own lives, and I could sort of play into that. Also quite an interesting sort of later on, one of my best friends growing up joined forces with me. I was into music. We used to make beats on Fruity Loops and Reason, and then sell them to the guys from the townships doing songs. At that stage it was still TKZ. So we were like making people, everybody was a rapper, and rapping about life. And so we got all this information coming in, tracks coming in, people talking. And obviously I didn't know a word before it was happening, but my friend was so kind in regards to being able to translate, and also I got it, and so forth. So there was this sort of interesting morphing of different cultures, having interests outside of psychology that came in and that sort of shaped me. But I think as well is, I feel like I'm moving away from the question. Yes, what's important is to understand that there are worldviews different than yours, and that you can only, you can understand the worldview, but you will never fully experience the worldview unless you go really outside of your own comfort zones and make and your friends have been as generous as possible to take you on that journey with. And stop having opinions. Opinions are very limiting things. So, good for you that you have an opinion, but it's sorry, I'm going to be very crass here, but it's like a penis. Every male has one. Sorry, let me rephrase.
Opinions. Opinions. Yeah.
It's like an opinion. You're allowed to have a penis, but please don't show it to everybody. And I think to a similar extent is to say that we've got to be careful with these types of things. An opinion is a justification. It's trying to establish yourself in the world. And maybe it's time that you don't justify yourself into the world. Maybe it's time to actually be a bit curious, and to come in there with a bit of humility and with a bit of curiosity. And maybe it's time that our minds do get changed. So I've been quite lucky in regards to the language, that I've been able to, with most clients that have come through, to navigate the language difficulties. But I think that's just on the absolute, grace and patience of the clients that have come in. I'm floored by the fact that I'm allowed to be able to operate in a country like South Africa with limited diversity of language. But what I do is really do a lot of work around changing the perspectives. And that required going to mentorship programs, having constant supervision. My big supervisor, especially when it comes to Afrocentric psychology, is Shahida Janssen from UNISA. She's done incredible work with me in regards to starting to understand what it means to work from the Afrocentric perspective. And then, very strangely, started to realize that, hold on a second, I remember, because my family is all in the Netherlands, my extended family is all in the Netherlands. And we had this one family member who we were taught, that's the person that doesn't go to church. And I suddenly remembered, but she must be atheist. No, she's not an atheist. Okay. And then I watched a Norwegian documentary on Netflix, which was talking about the spirit world. And it wasn't a story where they were hearing somewhere else. They were talking about their own Scandinavian customs. And the story was weird, because it was like a murder story, but then you find out that it was actually somebody captured by a spirit that didn't possess them, but kind of strengthened them through the relation, but they could no longer be part of this world. And the weirdest thing was, I could follow the story. Now, how could I follow the story? Because I have been exposed and have been working with and been grappling with the Afrocentric perspective. And that gave me such a beautiful component to follow the storyline. Then jumping to this aunt that lives in the Netherlands is that I remembered that she was telling me something about the world and she was talking about the fact that you get the answers of life through the things that grow and deep respect for Mother Nature. That Mother Nature gives you everything that you need. And I was like, but that's muti, man. That's the whole muti idea. It's not just making medicine out of freaking herbs. It's about the concept of the earth being able to generate and give us life and being connected with the earth. As the earth connects with us, we connect with the earth. It's a deep level of connection. And also the conversations around, especially Scandinavia holds it quite well, is the concept that when you die, you don't die completely. Your spirit goes up into the heavens. And the idea of having a relationship with those that are before us. And that even made sense to me because now we're talking about ancestors. I mean, I know it's the term Zulu, which means sky. It's the sky people, you know. It's this beautiful thing of the connection of the sky is interrelated with my presence of where I am, the respect of the people that were before us. But here's the problem: is that why do we not know these things? Why do we not talk about these things? Why do we? And I think it's very straightforward. Apartheid taught us that we all cannot converse with each other. It's scientifically, according to a misuse of Darwinian theory, that we are different species of each other. We cannot understand each other. It's impossible. All that I'm saying are obvious things. That destructive idea has this idea as if some people are more superior than other people, so you've got to talk down to people, you've got to simplify things to an individual. And as a result of that, we can accustom ourselves by learning your language. But there it is, learning your language. There's something not there that's not integrated, that's got no meaning value, that's not got no communication value. And you can learn another language and still be as disconnected as if you hadn't learned the language. It calls for something deeper. It calls for us to be able to realize that there are more perspectives. There's a language happening right there with my 18-month-old. Rah! Excitement. There's a level of it's not enough just to learn a language. We need to learn different worldviews. And even really on a very deep level, start to diversify our own worldviews, our own ways of understanding the world. And if we can start to do that, I'm thinking of Biko again here. I had it now, but now it's gone. But this sort of this concept of here's another thing: is that we know that. We were brought up on isiZulu culture, sort of parallel, but it's not starting to integrate. Is that Zulu culture has got a lot to do with connection with your history, connection with the earth, connection with your ancestors, and just that thing was that the guidance within Zulu culture came through with the idea of you communicate with your ancestors, give you the wisdom in order to be able to deal with the everyday facets of life. Of course, when a new worldview comes to your fore, you think, wow, this is amazing. You have to normalize it in order for it to make sense. It's not amazing for a person who's been practicing it their whole life. This is life. Yeah. It needs to integrate even to that level. Otherwise, it becomes voyeur, and voyeur as a psychologist is also very dangerous. Fanon writes extensively about that with the burqa and the obsession of the white man with the burqa. The thing is, the problem is that through trauma and through the fact that Verwoerd's legislation was about destroying the family structure. Like this guy was this cockroach was hell bent on destroying family structures of people of color in order to destabilize communities in order to keep the white man in power. That's literally what it's about. And as a result of that, it worked. That was the disgusting thing. And as a result of that, a disconnection started to come into place that is still very much still unfortunately
Present, yeah.
playing. I mean, and for example, in the Northern Cape, I remember having a client there where it was a daughter and a grandmother, and the grandmother talks rural Setswana, which, and we should, sorry, let me rephrase that, deep Setswana. Setswana. Her daughter speaks like a Gemeng. She calls it a Gemeng. She speaks Gemeng Setswana, which is more like street Setswana. And the two languages are so different that they need a translator in family gatherings in order for them to understand each other. That is the level at which Pavut succeeded. And let's be honest, until that new university, the Tlaka University, has spent a bit of time, you battle to find a Setswana dictionary. I think there is one, but you battle to find it. There are very few courses teaching Setswana. No university taught course teaching Setswana, with maybe the exception that a new project started with Tlaka University. We're 20-something years into a new democracy. It's these kind of ways in which the perpetuation of these damages take place that keep us so disconnected without us even realizing it. I'm sure you didn't even know I'm going to put you on the spot here, but I'm sure you didn't even know that Kimberley had a new university only about less than 10 years old. You know, it's that kind of thing. And so as a result, that disconnection takes place. And as a result as well, we know that children's parents often work in provinces away from that. I find that an incredible idea, an incredibly sad idea. That you can be living in the Eastern Cape with your grandmother and your parents. And come on, we know the psychology theory about this. We know what the impact is. If your own mother and your own father don't raise you up, even with adopted kids where they keep it quiet, they know it because of the deep psychological traumatization that takes place when a child is not with their parents. And as a result of that, mother works in the Western Cape, father works in the Western Cape, kids are in the Eastern Cape raised by grandmother, but it disconnects all those relationships. And this is pivotal for the Afrocentric, well, for the psychology of our country, because the thing, we stop saying Afrocentric, it's detrimental to the psychology of our country, because what happens then is I don't have that deep connection with my parents that would be the case if the socioeconomic issues were not in place. As a result of that, I then have a difficult relationship. Sometimes people find a way through. The resilience of human beings is incredible. But then when it gets to those phases where a person passes away and becomes an ancestor, I'm disconnected from that ancestor. I don't find that intense relationship, that connected relationship with that ancestor. And we know what that is going to do to you. It's going to disconnect you from your spirits. And I think that's exactly the thing that Steve Biko is talking about when he's talking about spiritual poverty, is that the system and the framework and the type of environment that we're living in at this point in time is detrimental to the ethics and the psychology of our people. And we're not really doing much about it. We're not changing it. And as a result of that, I'm worried that cycle then just perpetuates. I mean, two things that happens is when your ethics is under clouds. And can I just first of all say that my brothers and sisters as traditional healers are doing incredible work. But just as there are some accountants that are dodgy, as there's some police officers that are dodgy, as there's some psychologists that are dodgy, there's also some traditional healers that are dodgy. And sometimes comes in that narrative of you can connect with your ancestors, but it costs you the most expensive bottle of whiskey. That doesn't make any sense. It's not a Ubuntu. Whiskey is a disconnector in itself. It's not the same thing as the process of creating traditional beer, which is a complete process in putting place. There's no process to walking to the. I'm going to get into trouble for saying these things, but there's no process to going to your local bottle store and buying an expensive bottle of whiskey. That's a capitalist society, a capitalist system, and completely waters down the process. I mean, I remember being involved once with as an observer. Of course, I would never be allowed in those circles, but of the process that it took place in order to create beer. Traditional beer, and there is where the wisdom of that activity comes place. So if you're not able to connect yourself to spirituality, to your ancestors, to your connection to your ancestors, then you're open to people taking advantage of you. Or secondly, that Ubuntu has two legs. The first leg is I am through you, you are through us. But the second leg is the leg of ethics. There's an ethical leg in Ubuntu, and if you don't do ethics, then it becomes gangsterism. Gangsterism is very big on I am through you, you are through us, but not from an ethical perspective. And that necessarily becomes destructive. It's ethics plus I am through you, you are through us. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And look, I feel very uncomfortable having just splurged all that out because I'm very aware of my skin color, of the fact that I'm living in a place that looks okay because there's a fireplace here. So obviously, I'm talking from a very privileged perspective. So please criticize me. I think I deserve that for putting my neck on the chops. But I think these are the conversations that we need to start to have. And if I'm wrong, I need to be. I'm talking to your viewers as well. I need to be put in my place because that's also a very important part of my own personal development is to realize where those boundaries are. But yeah, this is what I've had the privilege of being able to sit with on my journey around these very difficult storylines from the clients that have been brave enough to struggle with me around these types of concepts.
Yeah, I mean, that's particularly why I wanted to talk to you because these things that you are bringing up, I think those are important things to discuss, and I think they're in there. I think we are all trying to figure out, what makes sense. So I want to say, the other university that I didn't mention is UNISA, so shout out to them. They're also doing a good job in expanding what we've learned, right? And the one word that I like that you brought up there when you started, you talked about being curious, right? And you said the future belongs to those who can struggle. I also think the future belongs to those who are willing to be curious, because then they don't share their opinions. And that's why when I talk to people, I'm very interested in their world to see how they come to think the way they do, and why they behave the way they do, and how they reason with things. So that idea, I think curiosity, for me, very important idea. The other word for me is respect, right?
Yes,
that we have to respect one another, and that makes a difference. And the idea you bring up about, say, language, that it's one thing to say I've learned a language, but it's quite another thing to understand deeply, to make the time to really understand a person's worldview, walk in their shoes, to be patient, listen enough, open to their views, how they understand things, so that we are able to connect. You bring up also the separation of families. Maybe some other time we should talk about that, because I find that partly while we are going to continue to struggle as a people in South Africa, I think is because of the way we relate, the way we bring families together. So the one thing I'm also passionate about, you'd be in a clinic and you'd see this nurse working and you'd say, where's the family? And the person would say, no, I'm here and my child is with my grandmother, and I'm here with my partner, and then we're just going to work together, and then we'll bring the child later, forgetting that there's a whole story. Then you have another child who's born in the city, and then this child you left with grandma comes and joins you, and then there's this clash about who's the eldest, and we misunderstand those little, well, not little, but developmental issues that we don't address, and how those can disrupt us. I think it's our job to actually educate a bit more, because I find some people do that because they don't know, and so when the project of apartheid has been successful in doing that. So as a black male, right, um, we, well, not speaking for many people, but even in therapy, or there's an idea that when you talk to women, when you talk about dating and stuff like this idea that, if you date a black guy, right,
Yeah.
that's the worst thing you could do, because he's
Yeah.
going to abandon you, and he's just basically useless. But when you think about it, is, fathers left, worked in mines, and all those things. So the things that you are bringing up, I do think that it's important for us to start creating content like that, to bring them to the fore, to talk about them, to develop them, to see where we agree, where we don't agree. But I do think we need that conversation. So when I see you thinking about, okay, say, look at my skin, you are bringing them up, I think that's wonderful, because we continue to have this conversation, and it will move from conversation to, collaboration, to documenting, to I think that we are at a point where we have to create. Nobody's coming from anywhere to help us. We have to create the things that that we need. I think that's where we are. And you've been
Yeah.
generous with your time. Maybe because then I asked you about social media, so I'll link the two questions, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
wanted to say,
Look,
but social media is more interested in the voice,
yeah.
how people like you and myself get ideas out, whether we are prepared for that, or whether we are threatened or told not to by the establishment, or our own fears and anxieties. And so, just on that, what do you think about that? But I also want to link it to my final question, which is, what does the future look like, um, for psychology? Because part of it, I think, it has to do with where the world is going in terms of technology,
Yeah.
and so there's a marriage there that we need to think about. I mean, even now we're having therapy through Zoom and Teams and all that. So two questions
Yeah.
in terms of how we express ourselves. Do you feel
Yeah.
that we are well trained? What are your thoughts on that? And how can we be more impactful,
Brilliant.
considering what's coming in the future and what we are wrestling with currently?
So let me do the social media question first, and then I'll do the. So the thing about social media, I think also we're kind of working it out as we come along. I mean,
Yeah,
we made an enormous jump when lockdown took place. I know a lot of
yeah.
us were dabbling with it before lockdown, but lockdown kind of really was the change,
Helped
because
us.
lockdown
Yeah.
forced everybody to be computer savvy. And Zoom, Instagram, social media, I think it was always sort of seen as a young person's thing until lockdown came place. Now all of a sudden it's engulfed. We've now become cyborgs,
Mm.
to use the Fassi Prof Fassi van Leventer's work. Um, the thing is, I'm a little bit, obviously I'm worried and I'm happy. I'm happy because now finally we found a communication line between us and clientele. But I think that there are some real big concerns we've got to think about. I think first of all is, I don't know if I'm comfortable with the idea of a psychologist as a superstar. And I think Instagram, unfortunately, can create that for you. You become the superstar. What would so and so say? And we've noticed that really does take place. Jordan Peterson's an example that comes to mind of a person who's a psychologist, has some some interesting perspectives, and now has become a superstar. And I think to an extent is, the problem with becoming a superstar is, what becomes a superstar, you or the message?
Yeah.
And the message needs to be, but the person, that whole thing. Best critique on that is the movie V for Vendetta, which I think everybody should watch at least once a year. That an idea needs to be stronger than a man, because a man can let you down, but an idea will continue to exist past the man. The other problem with social media is that the psychology requires process and to think about things. And we tell our clients when they're working with us, please don't make any drastic life changes, because sometimes we're going to veer this way, and then we're going to see it from this way. Then the next session, we're going to veer that way, and we're going to see it from that way. And if you make a decision from either of the two ways, it can be a bit of a biased decision, and that could have detrimental effects if you start making life choices while you're in therapy. You know, that usual thing that we train to tell our clients to be careful of. And I notice that too much on social media is, 8 ways to know if you're a narcissist, and the things are a bit ambiguous. And 3 or 4 of those things, oh my God, this person's a narcissist. And what the hell are we doing? Why are we basing social media on pathology? It's a weird thing. Narcissism is not something that should be a stop word to describe each other with. Narcissism is a diagnosis, and a diagnosis is hand in hand with formulation and care. There's no formulation going on there. There's no care going on there. We're teaching people how to diagnose. That's rogue's diagnosis. We know what that does. It does labeling, it does stigmatization, it does all the nonsense that we want to resolve ourselves from. Sorry, I do spare lots of sessions and also in interviews, so I hope that your clients will be okay with that. But the thing is, that we need to just be very careful of. It makes for great Instagram segments, 8 ways to see if your partner is a narcissist. I don't think it's helpful. I really don't think it's helpful. I think it moves us away. It obsesses too much about the pathology. It doesn't do enough around the healing. It doesn't teach you how to be a healthy human being. It just starts you to. So that whole thing. All right. I'm just going to check. Is that enough in regards to social media?
Yeah, beautiful. I would say actually, if you lead it nicely, it lends now nicely to the last question, because what you're describing is, what we prioritize, right? And so people come on social media and then they saying all these things, do this, do that, but it's not, when you essentially think about helping people, as you put it, so the diagnosis is not in a vacuum. It's okay, so we're identifying a problem, we formulate, we have a plan, and then we treat. So at the end of the day, we want to heal. We don't want to, we want to be useful. We don't just want to be known for the sake of knowing, of being known, or known for the sake of making money, but we really care about people. At the end of the day, we want to heal people. Then those are some of the ineffective ways. So last question, how can we become more impactful?
Okay, so here's the thing is, I think earlier on in the conversation you spoke about, you were brought up on Freud, and that thing has been bothering me so much. Is, look, I mean, psychodynamic understanding and so forth has obviously had its amazing impacts on the way that I work, the way I think. But here's an interesting thing. So often when we talk about westernized psychology, we talk about Freud and we sometimes talk about Jung. Now, what do Freud and Jung have in common? Neither of them were psychologists. Just hold that for a second. And just so it's a really interesting thing. Obviously, they couldn't be psychologists. I don't even think the profession was there in its fullest. But I mean, Freud wasn't even a doctor. Jung at least had the doctor training. The thing is, this is an important thing, is psychology in South Africa doesn't have to be Jungian. It doesn't have to be Freudian. I mean, there's place for it and so forth. But we need to start to think a little bit. Now, I went to a Parkwood Congress, I think that was about, I can't remember now, about 4 or 5 years ago.
It's around about then, yeah.
And I walked in on a workshop because I wanted to see somebody's presentation afterwards. But I walked in there, and it was 3 panelists, one from South Africa. We were very well presented. I think it was Norman Duncan and Garth Stevens, if I'm not mistaken. And then there were 2, but the 2 that I want to center on was from Jamaica, from the University of Jamaica, who had said that they had started with the same kind of questioning of, but Freud wasn't a psychologist. So which people that were not psychologists could we train into as theorists. And they were playing around with, or had started work around developing ideas around the music of Bob Marley, or the lyrics of Bob Marley,
Mm,
and were training people within the Bob Marley framework. And that
mm.
just a thing in my head, because
Like, wow, yeah, yeah.
I mean, if there's one country where you can use our people in order to show psychology, it would be South Africa. I'm
Mm,
sorry, but like South Africa owns it when it comes to resilience, when it comes to passive resistance. I mean, Gandhi learned passive resistance from ANC. Let's not forget this.
mm,
The fact that we talk about empowerment. I mean, Bob Marley often dedicates Biko as one of his biggest influences. I mean, we
mm.
own this territory. The Constitution, which is world renowned, was basically the thought. Justice Albie, the former Justice Albie Sachs, is very
Yeah.
clear as to who came up with that. It was the work of Oliver Tambo. It was the thought process of Oliver Tambo. So there's all of these brilliant theorists in South Africa that are talking innately psychology. That
Mm,
are Pico, I Write What I Like is a psychology textbook. And the moment that we realize that and start developing it as such, I think the better we'll be for it. So we're sitting with all of this information, it's busy collecting dust at bargain books. I know, because I go to scrouge through bargain books, bought all my books
yeah.
from bargain book. My own project is to bring that text, to read it, to think about it, and to start introducing it into the therapy room. So my therapy room doesn't have a single book of Freud in it. It's got Steve Biko, I Write What I Like. It's got Albert Lutuli, Let My People Go. It's got um, Fanon's, The Wretched of the Earth. It's got those books, because those are the books that are relevant. Oh, and that brilliant book from YB Long, Nation on the Couch. That is the
Yeah.
books that are sitting on my, and then for good measure, because I'm working with a Muslim crowd, is I've got a book around jinns and the influence
Mm,
around astrology. But those are the books that are sitting in my therapy room, and I've never thought, okay, let me go find the box where my Jung stuff is and bring that out. No, it's become nostalgia, and that's how you stay relevant within the field of psychology, is by being relevant with the pulse of humanity within the South African context. Now,
mm.
what makes a professional? So I used to play drums. So before I became a psychologist, I was actually studying a degree in music. We were always asked this question: what makes you a professional musician? And the only answer is that society gives you the opportunity to be able to play your drums for 8-10 hours a day, and we'll worry about by paying you your food, your water, your electricity, da 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 da. Um, what's the what is the definition of a professional psychology? Is that if you're a psychologist, society through the payments has warranted you the opportunity to completely engulf yourself in psychology. You can be working 8 to 10 hours a day, or maybe that's a bit too much, but yeah, 8 to 10 hours a day of psychology, and that should give you a perspective and an understanding that the average person with an average working day will not be able to. And in that way, we are the leaders, or should I say the facilitators, as a better word, or should be leading, let me rather say that, the conversation around these types of questions that you say. But the further away that we are off the pulse of South Africa, the more irrelevant we become. So the relevance is to be found in the consulting room with the clients. And if you're spending not enough time in that space, or you're in mental health and you're not having that communication line back to yourself, where you're working with process, working with individuals, being curious, not telling everybody what to do, none of this didactic. If we can start to become curious with the clients, you will stay relevant. If you don't, you can make a career, you could be a superstar on Instagram, but you become irrelevant after a while.
Wonderful. I think that's a beautiful place to pause it. I mean, I was looking forward to the conversation. Quite enjoyed it. Wonderful insights, you know.
Thank you.
Perhaps we should talk about dedicate sometime in the future to discuss Biko and Fanon. You know, we
Oh,
can have a
please.
whole. But otherwise, Daniel, thank you very much for honoring me. Thank you for taking the time to have a conversation with me. Wonderful.
No, absolutely, and I'm excited by your venture and what you're busy with in regards with this project. I think thank you for keeping some form of spotlight on psychology and that we are busy with these things. I think you're doing incredible work. Thank you. Yeah.
Great stuff.